My hands stayed steady as I read his name on the docket. Dimitri Voss. After 30 years, those two words still had the power to make my stomach turn. But I was no longer that frightened 15-year-old girl. I was Judge Elena Whitmore now, and he was about to stand in my courtroom. I watched him enter, his expensive suit unable to hide what I knew lurked beneath. Gray had touched his temples, lines marked his face, but those eyes, those calculating eyes, remained the same. He walked with the confidence of a man who had never faced consequences. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? I was just one of many. The prosecutor began outlining the case. A 17-year-old girl. Abuse of trust. A respected community leader who had used his position to prey on the vulnerable. The pattern was sickeningly familiar. I kept my face neutral, years of legal training serving me well, while inside, memories threatened to break free. He sat there looking confused, even offended, as if such accusations were beneath him. His lawyer, young, ambitious, clearly believing in his client's innocence, prepared to defend a monster. I gripped my gavel, feeling its weight, its power. Today would be different. 30 years ago, I was Lena Winters, invisible and eager to matter. My parents worked double shifts, leaving me alone most afternoons. That's when I first met him at the community center. Mr. Voss ran the youth program, and everyone loved him. Parents trusted him. Kids looked up to him. He chose his targets carefully. He noticed me reading in the corner, always alone. "You're special, Lena," he said, sitting too close. Different from the others. More mature. Those words felt like sunshine to a lonely girl. I didn't recognize the trap being set. He offered to mentor me, to help with college applications. My parents were thrilled. A respected man taking interest in their daughter's future seemed like a blessing. The grooming was gradual. Special attention became private meetings. Compliments became touches that lingered too long. He isolated me from friends, convinced me they wouldn't understand our special connection. By the time I realized something was wrong, I was already trapped in his web. He had made me believe I was complicit, that I had wanted this attention. The shame kept me silent. I remember the afternoon it happened. Rain drummed against the community center windows. He had asked me to stay after the program ended, to help with inventory. The building was empty. When he locked the door, my instincts screamed danger, but I ignored them. Good girls didn't think bad thoughts about respectable men. "You're becoming so beautiful," he said, moving closer. His breath smelled like coffee and mints. "I've been patient, but you're ready now." I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. When I said no, he laughed. "Don't be silly. You've been wanting this." All those private conversations, those smiles. You can't tease a man and then act innocent. What happened next broke something inside me. Not just my body, but my trust in the world. When it was over, he straightened his tie and warned me that no one would believe me. "Who are you?" "Nobody. I'm Dimitri Voss. I help kids. I have awards from the mayor." He was right. At that moment, I knew he was right. So I stayed silent, gathered my broken pieces, and went home. That night, I wrote everything in my journal. Every detail. Every word he said. It was the only way I could make it real, make it something that actually happened instead of a nightmare I couldn't wake from. 3 weeks later, I tried to tell my mother. She was folding laundry, humming softly. "Mom," I started, my voice shaking. "Something happened to Mr. Voss." She looked up, concerned but distracted. "Did you have an argument? He called yesterday, said you've been distant. Such a nice man, worrying about you like that." The words died in my throat. He had already prepared his defense, painting me as a troubled teen. He hurt me," I managed to whisper. My mother's face changed, but not how I expected. "Lena, that's a serious accusation. Mr. Voss has done so much for this community. Are you sure you didn't misunderstand something?" Misunderstand. That word echoed in my head for years. How does someone misunderstand being held down? How does someone misunderstand pleading for it to stop? But I saw the fear in her eyes, fear of scandal, fear of powerful people, fear of truth. So I nodded, mumbled something about being confused, and never spoke of it again. That night, I wrote more in my journal. About trying to tell. About the look in my mother's eyes. about how silence felt safer than disbelief. I hid the journal in my closet, a secret testimony no one would read. The months that followed were a blur of pretending. I smiled at school, kept my grades up, and avoided the community center. When people asked why I stopped going, I made excuses. Mr. Voss told everyone I was going through a rebellious phase. Teenagers, he'd say with that practiced smile. They're so unpredictable. I learned to split myself in two. The outside Lena who functioned normally, and the inside Lena who screamed silently. I threw myself into studying, determined to leave this town, these memories, him. Books became my escape. In stories, justice existed. In stories, the guilty paid for their crimes. Some days were harder than others. I'd see him at the grocery store, at town events, always surrounded by admirers. He'd catch my eye and wink, a reminder of the power he held. My body would betray me, shaking, sweating, even as I forced myself to look away. He enjoyed my fear. It fed something dark in him. One day, I heard whispers about another girl who had suddenly left the youth program. Sarah Chin. She had been quiet, studious, alone, just like me. I wanted to reach out, to ask if she was okay, but I couldn't. What if I was wrong? What if I was projecting my own nightmare onto her? The silence had become a prison I couldn't escape. The day I left for college felt like a prison break. 18 years old with a full scholarship to a university 3 states away. My parents were proud, confused by my desperation to leave, but happy for my success. I packed light, taking only what mattered. Hidden at the bottom of my suitcase was the journal, wrapped in plastic. I couldn't leave it behind. The miles between me and him felt like armor. In a new city, I could reinvent myself. No one knew Lena Winters. I became Elena, a pre-law student with ambitious dreams. When classmates talked about home, I kept quiet. When they shared childhood memories, I smiled and redirected the conversation. I was building a new identity on the ashes of the old one. But trauma doesn't respect geography. Nightmares followed me to my dorm room. Panic attacks ambushed me in crowded spaces. The smell of coffee and mints could send me spiraling. I learned to manage, to hide, to function. I told myself that success was the best revenge. Becoming someone who mattered, someone with power, that would be my victory. I threw myself into my studies with fierce determination. Criminal law became my focus. Every case I read, every legal principle I memorized, felt like building weapons for a war I might never fight. Law school was harder than college, but I welcomed the challenge. Long hours in the library meant less time for memories. I graduated near the top of my class, surprising professors who wondered what drove me so hard. If they knew the truth, would they understand? Or would they see me as damaged goods? I started as a prosecutor, putting away criminals who hurt others. Each conviction felt like a small victory against him, even though he remained free. I was good at my job, maybe too good. Colleagues said I was relentless, that I never gave up on a case. They didn't know I saw his face in every predator I prosecuted. Years passed. I married David, a kind man who never pushed when I flinched at certain touches or woke screaming from nightmares. I told him I had a difficult childhood and left it at that. He accepted my boundaries, loved me despite the walls I built. We had 2 daughters, and I watched them like a hawk, determined to protect them from monsters in respectable clothing. When the judgeship opened, I knew it was time. 15 years as a prosecutor had prepared me. The confirmation process was grueling, but my record was spotless. Judge Elena Whitmore. The title felt like armor. Behind the bench, I had power. I could protect others, ensure justice. I never imagined he would enter my courtroom. Your Honor, the state charges Dimitri Voss with sexual abuse of a minor. The prosecutor's voice was clear, confident. I had handpicked her for this case without explaining why. Amanda Richardson was brilliant, thorough, and most importantly, she believed victims. The victim, Sophia Martinez, sat in the gallery with her parents. 17 years old, artistic, quiet. She drew in a sketchbook during breaks, her hands never still. I saw myself in her hunched shoulders, her darting eyes. She was brave to come forward, braver than I had been. But bravery didn't guarantee justice. Voss's lawyer, James Whitley, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, my client is a pillar of this community. These accusations are not only false, but malicious. We intend to prove that this troubled young woman has fabricated these claims for attention." The familiar playbook. Attack the victim, invoke his reputation, create doubt. As the trial progressed, patterns emerged. The grooming techniques, the isolation, the careful selection of vulnerable targets. Sophia testified with quiet strength, describing encounters that echoed my own experience. Voss sat there shaking his head, playing the wrongly accused man perfectly. The jury watched him with sympathy. He was too well-dressed, too well-spoken to be a monster. Amanda Richardson was building her case methodically, but I could see the jury wavering. Voss's character witnesses were impressive: business leaders, politicians, even a bishop. Each testified to his good character, his contributions to society. How could such a man be guilty? The defense painted Sophia as troubled, attention-seeking, confused. During a recess, I overheard jurors talking. "He seems so genuine," one said. "Why would he risk everything?" Another nodded. "The girl seems confused. Maybe she misunderstood his intentions." That word again, misunderstood. 30 years later, and nothing had changed. The same excuses, the same blindness to evil wearing a respectable mask. I watched Sophia crumble under cross-examination. Whitley was ruthless, questioning every detail, implying she had wanted the attention. When she cried, he suggested she was being dramatic. When she stayed calm, he called her to rehearse. There was no right way for a victim to act, no perfect response that would satisfy those determined to doubt. That night, I went home and dug out my journal. The plastic wrapping had yellowed, but the pages inside remained intact. My teenage handwriting looked so young, so desperate. Every word was evidence that had never seen light. I sat at my kitchen table, David asleep upstairs, and made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, Voss took the stand. He was the picture of wounded dignity, denying every accusation with practiced sincerity. "I've dedicated my life to helping young people," he said, his voice catching with fake emotion. "To be accused of something so heinous, it's destroying me." Several jurors looked sympathetic. One woman actually wiped away a tear. I watched Sophia shrink in her seat. Her mother held her hand, but I could see the doubt creeping in. Would her own family start to wonder? This was how he won, not just through assault, but through the systematic destruction of credibility. He was an expert at making victims question their own experiences. "I remember Sophia from the youth center," he continued. "Such a troubled girl. I tried to help her, perhaps I was too kind. Sometimes troubled youth misinterpret kindness as something else." There it was again. Misinterpretation. Misunderstand. The words that silenced victims, that made them doubt their own memories. My hands clenched beneath my robes. The journal in my chambers felt like it was burning through the walls. How many girls had there been? How many had stayed silent like me? How many had tried to speak and been dismissed? The system I had devoted my life to was failing another girl, right in front of me. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I stood at my window, watching the city lights, weighing my options. Revealing my past would change everything. My career, my reputation, my family's privacy, all would be affected. But Sophia's face haunted me. She deserved justice, and I had evidence that could ensure it. I thought about my daughters, sleeping peacefully down the hall. What would I want someone to do for them? What example did I want to set? For 30 years, I had carried the secret, letting it shape me in the shadows. Maybe it was time to step into the light, to transform trauma into truth. David found me in my study at 3 a.m, the journal open in front of me. "What's wrong?" he asked, seeing my tears. For the first time, I told him everything. About Voss, about the assault, about the silence that followed. He held me as I sobbed, 30 years of suppressed pain finally finding release. "You have to do what's right," he said when I finally stopped crying. "Whatever that means for you. I'll support you either way." His faith gave me strength. By dawn, I had made my decision. Today, silence would end. Today, Lena Winters would finally speak, through the voice of Judge Elena Whitmore. The court reconvened at 9 sharp. I could feel the weight of what was coming, but my hands were steady. The defense was preparing to rest, confident in their dismantling of Sophia's credibility. That's when I spoke the words that would shatter the carefully constructed facade. "Counsel, approach the bench." Both lawyers came forward, confused by the interruption. "I need to address the court," I said quietly. "There's information relevant to this case that must be disclosed." Whitley started to object, but I raised my hand. "This is a matter of judicial ethics and evidence. Clear the jury." Once the jury was gone, I stood. The courtroom fell silent, sensing something unprecedented was about to happen. "I must recuse myself from this case," I began, my voice carrying across the room. "But before I do, there is evidence that must be entered into the record. Evidence I have carried for 30 years. Voss's face showed the first crack in his composure. He leaned forward, studying me with new attention. Did he recognize something in my voice? In my eyes? I met his gaze steadily. The frightened girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had found her voice. "Your Honor." Amanda Richardson looked confused but alert. I could see her prosecutor's instincts engaging. "What kind of evidence?" 30 years ago, I was Lena Winters." The words fell into the silent courtroom like stones into still water. I was 15 years old, and I attended the youth program at Riverside Community Center. The program is run by Dimitri Voss. Now his face changed, recognition dawning with growing horror. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," Whitley started, but I continued. "I was one of his victims. He groomed me, isolated me, and when I was 15 years old, he assaulted me in the community center. I tried to tell my mother. She didn't believe me. So I stayed silent, changed my name when I married, built a new life. But I documented everything. I held up the journal, its worn cover a testament to time. Every detail, written within hours of the assault. Names, dates, his exact words. The grooming process he used on me is identical to what Sophia Martinez described. Because predators don't change their methods. They just find new victims." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for phones. Whitley shouted objections. Voss had gone pale, his carefully maintained image cracking like a mirror hit by a stone. But I kept my eyes on Sophia. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time since the trial began, she sat up straight. She wasn't alone. She believed. "Order." I banged my gavel, silencing the chaos. "I will finish my statement." The courtroom settled, all eyes fixed on me. Even Voss's supporters looked shaken, doubt creeping into their certainty. Mr. Voss told me no one would believe me because I was nobody. He was right then. A scared teenager's word against a respected man? I knew how that would end. But I'm not nobody now. I'm Judge Elena Whitmore. I've spent 15 years prosecuting predators and 10 years on this bench protecting victims. And I'm here to say that Sophia Martinez is telling the truth. I know because the same thing happened to me. The same grooming. The same isolation. The same threats afterward. I looked directly at Voss. His mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the panic beneath. "You don't remember me, do you? Why would you? I was just one girl among many. But I remember you. I remember every word, every moment. And I wrote it all down." I held up the journal again. "This will be entered as evidence. 30 years of silence ends today." "Your Honor," Amanda Richardson stood, her voice professional despite her shock. "The state requests this evidence be admitted to show a pattern of behavior." Whitley objected frantically, but even he knew the tide had turned. A judge's testimony, backed by contemporary documentation? The case had transformed completely. "You're lying," Voss suddenly shouted, jumping to his feet. His lawyer tried to restrain him, but rage had replaced his calculated calm. "This is a setup. A conspiracy." But his voice cracked on the words. He remembered. I could see it in his eyes, the moment of recognition, the memory of that rainy afternoon. "Sit down, Mr. Voss," I said calmly. Strange how facing him from the bench felt different than I'd imagined. I had expected to feel fear, maybe even shame. Instead, I felt only cold clarity. He was smaller than my nightmares had made him, older, more pathetic. A man who had built his life on the silence of his victims. "You can't do this," he continued, struggling against his lawyer's grip. "That was 30 years ago. Even if something happened, the statute of limitations," he caught himself, but it was too late. That half-admission hung in the air like a confession. His supporters in the gallery exchanged uncertain looks. "This isn't about prosecuting you for what you did to me," I said. "This is about establishing a pattern. About showing the jury who you really are. About making sure Sophia gets the justice I never did." I turned to the court reporter. "Please note that I am officially recusing myself from this case. Judge Patterson will take over. But this evidence stands." After stepping down from the bench, I was sworn in as a witness. Strange to sit in the witness chair in my own courtroom. Amanda Richardson approached carefully, respectfully. "Judge Whitmore, can you describe what's in this journal?" I opened it to the first entry, my hands steady despite the painful memories. The first entry is dated March 15th, 30 years ago. It describes how Mr. Voss first approached me, the things he said to gain my trust. I read excerpts, each word a window into the past. The grooming techniques were textbook: isolation, special attention, gradual boundary violations, making the victim feel complicit. This entry from April describes how he would keep me after programs, always when Entry describes the assault in detail. Written the same night it happened. The courtroom was silent except for muffled sobs from Sophia's mother. Several jurors were crying. Even the court officers looked shaken. Voss sat slumped at the defense table, his empire of respectability crumbling with each word I read. His lawyer had stopped objecting, perhaps recognizing the futility. "Were there others?" Amanda asked gently. I nodded. "I suspected Sarah Chin, but I never knew for sure. When you're that young, that scared, you don't know how to reach out. The silence becomes a wall between victims." My testimony opened floodgates. During the lunch recess, 3 women approached the prosecutor. They had been watching the trial, wrestling with their own memories. My public revelation gave them courage. By afternoon, 2 more had called. All had similar stories. All had been silenced by fear, shame, and his reputation. Judge Patterson, who had taken over the case, allowed Amanda to present this new information to the jury. The pattern was undeniable. Spanning 30 years, different community centers, but always the same methods. Always vulnerable girls. Always the same threats afterward. The defense's case collapsed like a house of cards. Whitley made a valiant effort to discredit me. "Isn't it convenient that you happen to be the judge on this case?" But his heart wasn't in it. How do you attack a respected judge's credibility? How do you explain away a journal that predated the current case by 3 decades? Even Voss's supporters were leaving the courtroom, unable to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster being revealed. Sophia watched everything with a mix of vindication and sorrow. During a break, she approached me. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing me, for speaking up." I hugged her carefully, recognizing the fragility of a recent victim. "You were brave first," I told her. "You gave me the courage to finally speak." Closing arguments took on a different tone. Amanda Richardson wove together the testimonies, showing a pattern of predation spanning decades. How many more victims stayed silent? She asked the jury. How many girls carried this burden alone because they knew no one would believe them? Today, you have the chance to say, "We believe. We see through the mask. We choose justice." Whitley's closing was brief, half-hearted. He made weak arguments about statutes of limitations, about prejudicing the jury. But everyone could see the truth now. His client was guilty, had always been guilty, had counted on silence to protect him. That silence was broken, and with it, his power. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. As we waited, I sat with Sophia and her family. Other victims had gathered too, a silent sisterhood born of shared trauma. We didn't need to speak. We understood each other's journey, the weight we had carried, the relief of finally setting it down. When the jury returned, Voss looked like a ghost. Gone was the confident community leader. In his place sat an exposed predator facing consequences for the first time. The foreman stood, verdict in hand. The courtroom held its breath. Justice, delayed for 30 years, was finally at hand. Guilty on all counts. The words rang through the courtroom like a bell of liberation. Sophia collapsed in her mother's arms, sobbing with relief. The other victims held each other, 30 years of pain finally validated. I remained composed, years of judicial training keeping me steady, but inside, that frightened 15-year-old girl finally felt heard. Voss didn't move as the verdict was read. His facade had completely crumbled, leaving a hollow man who had built his entire life on the suffering of others. The bailiffs approached to take him into custody. As they cuffed him, he looked at me one last time. I met his gaze steadily. The power dynamic had finally shifted. "You destroyed everything," he hissed as they led him past. "My reputation, my life's work." "No," I interrupted calmly. "You destroyed yourself the moment you chose to hurt children. We just stopped letting you hide it." He was led away, and I felt no satisfaction, no joy, just a quiet sense of completion. Justice wasn't revenge. It was simply truth finally spoken. The sentencing would come later, but the maximum penalties were severe. With multiple victims testifying, he would likely die in prison. The community organizations were already distancing themselves, removing his name from buildings, rescinding awards. His legacy was being erased, replaced with the truth of what he was. The media storm was intense but brief. My story, while dramatic, was depressingly common. What made headlines was a judge breaking decades of silence to protect another victim. Legal experts debated the ethics, but the public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Letters poured in from other survivors, thanking me for showing that silence could end. My daughters, now teenagers themselves, were my biggest concern. We talked honestly about why I had hidden this part of my past, about the complexities of trauma and healing. They were proud of me, they said, for choosing truth over comfort. Their generation understood things mine hadn't, that victims weren't to blame, that speaking up was brave, not shameful. David stood by me through everything, a steady presence as I navigated this new reality. "I wish you had felt safe telling me sooner," he said one night. "But I understand why you couldn't." His unconditional support helped heal wounds I didn't know still bled. Love, real love, was the opposite of what Voss had offered. It freed rather than trapped. I returned to the bench after a month's leave. Some had questioned whether I could remain impartial after such a revelation. But my colleagues understood. My experience made me more committed to justice, not less. I had walked through fire and emerged tempered, not broken. 6 months after the trial, I established a foundation for survivors of childhood sexual abuse. The Hidden Voice Foundation provided legal support, counseling, and most importantly, belief. Too many victims stayed silent because they knew the system would fail them. We worked to change that system, one case at a time. Sophia became our first youth advocate. Her artistic talents found new purpose, creating materials that helped other victims understand they weren't alone. Her parents, initially devastated by what had happened, channeled their anger into activism. Together, we pushed for legislative changes, longer statutes of limitations, better training for law enforcement, mandatory reporting expansion. Other judges began sharing their own stories. A quiet revolution happened as professionals in law, medicine, education acknowledged their own traumas. The shame that had kept us silent for generations began to lift. We learned that survivors were everywhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for permission to speak. The journal was eventually donated to a museum exhibition on survival and justice. Seeing it under glass, my teenage words preserved for others to read, felt surreal. That frightened girl who wrote those words could never have imagined this ending. But she had created evidence that waited 30 years to serve its purpose. Her voice, preserved in ink, had finally been heard. 1 year later, I presided over another abuse case. This time, the victim was believed immediately. The prosecutor used precedents from Voss's case. The defense couldn't rely on attacking the victim's credibility. The landscape had changed. The jury convicted based on evidence, not prejudice. Progress, slow but real. I received a letter from Sarah Chin. The girl I had suspected was also a victim. She confirmed my fears. Voss had hurt her too. She had moved across the country, built walls like mine, and stayed silent. My speaking out had freed her to finally tell her own family. She wasn't ready to go public, but she thanked me for showing her it was possible. The community center where it happened was transformed. New leadership implemented strict safeguarding policies. Background checks, multiple adults present, transparent communication with parents. They couldn't undo the past, but they could prevent future predators from finding hunting grounds. A plaque near the entrance honored all survivors of abuse who found courage to speak. My mother, now elderly, finally apologized. "I should have listened," she said through tears. "I was so afraid of scandal, of powerful people. I failed you." I forgave her, understanding how society trained women to doubt each other, to protect men's reputations over children's safety. Her generation was changing too, slowly recognizing complicity in silence. As I write this final chapter, Voss has been in prison for a year. He will never hurt another child. More importantly, the systems that protected him are being dismantled. Training programs teach adults to recognize grooming. Children learn that their bodies belong to them, that secrets that feel bad should be told. The nightmares have mostly stopped. When they come, I remind myself that I'm not that helpless teenager anymore. I'm Judge Elena Whitmore, who used her power to protect others. The journal that once held my secret shame became evidence that saved another girl. Pain transformed into purpose, silence into strength. Sophia is in college now, studying law. She wants to be a prosecutor, to be for others what Amanda Richardson was for her. We have lunch sometimes, two survivors connected by truth. She's dating someone kind, learning to trust. Healing isn't linear, but she's on her way. We both are. This story doesn't have a clean ending because healing never does. Some days are hard. Triggers remain. But I've learned that speaking the truth, however late, has power. Every survivor who breaks their silence makes it easier for the next one. We're building a world where children are believed, where predators can't hide behind respectability, where justice might be delayed, but isn't denied. My name is Elena Whitmore. I was Lena Winters. I am a survivor, a judge, a mother, a voice for the silenced. And I never spoke of what he did to me until I became the judge in his case. Sometimes the longest journey to justice begins with a single word: guilty.